Hi, good morning, everybody. I am Robin Desser, and I am introducing Valeria Luiselli. I'm her editor at Knopf. Thank you all for coming this morning on a dreary day. This event always means so much to all of us here at Penguin Random House. The contributions of libraries and librarians in getting the message out about our books and putting books into the hands of readers, it's invaluable. And your passion and commitment, this is especially dear to me because my mom was a librarian, and my own passion for books was born in the East Flatbush libraries. So thank you again for coming. I am so excited to be introducing Valeria to you. She's an author I had been following for many years with tremendous admiration, and she joins Knopf for the first time with this absolutely dazzling, brilliant, moving novel called Lost Children Archive. She is an incredibly gifted, humane human being who operates on multiple levels in and around the world. She's lived on every continent. She seems too young to have already written 4 previous books, 2 of them NBCC finalists, including her delightfully unclassifiable novel, The Story of My Teeth. I couldn't resist reading a book called that, and that's where I met you first. And last year's Tell Me How It Ends, which is a nonfiction book drawn from the questions child refugees get asked when they are detained at the border, when they try to cross from Central America into the United States. She is as engaged politically as she is formally inventive on the page. As I mentioned, I had been following her work for years, hoping that one day maybe we would have the opportunity to publish her. But I was nevertheless completely bowled over when this novel landed on my desk. Lost Children Archive, it has all the qualities of her prior work that I loved, but it is broader in scope. It's this sort of unput-downable tango of texts and images and even sounds that's poignant, it's sly, it's dazzling, and it's incredibly emotional. It's emotional because it's a family story, and it's a novel of vividly rendered places in our country. We just received a comment from Tommy Orange, who says, "This is a road trip novel that transcends the form while also being the perfect American road trip novel for right now." The book begins in summer in New York City with a family, a mother and a son. They're setting out on a cross-country journey from New York to Arizona to the Apacheria, which is the place where the Apaches called home. They journey west. They listen to the news on the car radio, and there is this immigration crisis on the border. And you start to sense, too, that there's another crisis in the car, a family crisis, a more intimate crisis. So you start to see that this book is as urgent for its politics as it is for its emotions of what's going to happen to this family in this car as they head west. The other thing I love about this book that I feel pertains to you guys is you are the collectors of documents of our culture, of our memories, and this book, in a way, is an archive of how we collect the memories and the things that matter to us the most. So in a way, it is its own archive. You read this novel really with your heart in your throat. It's already being greeted by the independent bookstores who have always supported Valeria with great art. Or just one comment from Eugenia Vela in Book People, Austin, Texas. I love Valeria Luiselli's writing because it sits with you forever. You have to let it simmer, the sentences, the music in her writing. In Lost Children Archive, we get to spend time with a family. We listen to Bowie in the car. We eat at middle-of-nowhere diners. We argue over the wrinkled map of the United States. Told from the perspective of a mother and son, Lost Children Archive is a story of family and memory. With this deeply personal and moving story, Valeria Luiselli will set up camp in your heart. It's a total pleasure to introduce Valeria Luiselli.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I think the only other time I felt as safe as I do in this room was a week ago in a room full of doctors giving a talk about immigration, the immigration crisis and health. So I grew up, as Robin said, in several different places. I don't think in every continent, but I've never been to Australia, but it's true. I grew up in Costa Rica and South Africa and India and Korea. And it was in Korea where I learned how to read and write. And I was learning how to read and write at the same time as I was learning how to speak English. So in fact, I was learning how to speak, read, and write in English all together, all at the same time when I was 5 years old. That's in the 1980s. And I lived in a very solitary space for a while, right? I mean, coming as a young Mexican girl to Korea, to an American school in Korea, I think I was silent for 6 months. And slowly, as I learned how to read and write, I found a space of certain security, which were these little notebooks that I would make during my class time, where I would jot down all the English words that I was learning, or what I thought were English words. And then I would make little books with them. And those little books full of words became books full of sentences that I guess if you would read now were close to like very avant-garde poetry. And once I finally had a grip of writing and reading and speaking, I wouldn't shut up. It was terrible, and I became a very rebellious child. I was a horribly rebellious child and teenager. Now I'm a radical nerd, but I was a really rebellious kid. And the library in my school in Korea, I thought had books that were really boring. They were books for my age and I should have been reading them, but I was like, no, this is not exciting. I was really into horror. Again, now I wouldn't pay to see a movie to scare me. I would never do that. I don't like to be scared. But I don't know why, when I was 7 or 8 years old, my favorite feeling was fear. And I got really into Stephen King. So I would sneak into the library for the high school kids. And I detected the Stephen King section. And I was one of those horrible library attendees that would hide the book behind the shelves because I didn't. Yeah, I know. I've then repented. I've changed. I've Catholic confession, everything. But I did. I was reading It. Do you remember It? And that's how I really learned how to read. So reading for me was an act of rebellion somehow, right? And that is very freeing as well, right? I had the luck to not feel reading as a kind of imposition or as something, but rather as a space of liberation and of assertion of personal freedom and the right to imagination, right? I don't know if I still like Stephen King, but I really thank him for giving me that entry into literature, and libraries to give me that space where I could hide between aisles and not be seen, and just read. Now, writing, I told you a minute ago that I went from rebel to radical nerd, and therefore writing is the only space where I'm rebellious really right now. I don't even go to marches and sit-ins because I'm not a citizen yet, so I'm scared to go to sit-ins because I don't have the protection of citizenship. So really writing is the only space where I find now a freedom to transgress and question. And that is the spirit in which this book began, Lost Children Archive. It's not a book inspired by anything, but rather a book born from a combination of anger or political rage and slowly acquired clarity. I was driving with my family to the southwest in the summer of 2014, and I've written about a little bit about that trip in my previous book, the book that Robin mentioned, Tell Me How It Ends, and the so-called immigration crisis, better called refugee crisis, was just beginning, and I was horrified, and I was also very keenly observing how my own children reacted to the news of that crisis. How do children retell themselves the stories that they hear on the radio or that they hear from their parents? How do they replay them or reenact them in their minds, and how that becomes a constitutive part of their worldview, right? And so I started taking note, and as we traveled, of all these reactions that the children were having to the immigration crisis, and that's where I left it. Years went past. I kept on taking note. I focused on writing a book, an essay about the immigration crisis, because I was completely spoiling the novel by trying to turn it into a political vessel for my anger. And it's good if there's a little bit of, or even a lot of anger in a novel, but you have to learn how to play with the volume in fiction, in a way that nonfiction is more, I don't know, it allows a different kind of tone, right? But I was stuffing the novel with all my feelings and with a lot of information about visas and that kind of thing. So I stopped writing it. I took care of my own political rage, wrote Tell Me How It Ends, and then went back to the novel, understanding that what I was doing in that novel was not only denouncing the current state of affairs, but really trying to understand loneliness in childhood and confusion about politics in childhood, and the relationship between a family crisis and political crisis, which, by the way, is the same thing, right? I mean, I think we understood in 2016 that there is no division between the public space and the private space, that we are affected by public life constantly, and that we are political beings as well as private individuals. And that novel explores that entanglement of politics and consciousness. It is a road novel, but it's also an anti-road novel. I would say that maybe one of the foundational myths in the US is the understanding of the US in terms of the expansion from east to west, right? A country being invented, conquered, whatever you want to call it, but there's this east to west narrative, right? And of course, not all road trip novels go east to west, but there's kind of this an acrossness in the mythology that sustains the genre or the subgenre of a road trip novel. But then there are other foundational myths that are more silenced or completely silenced in the creation of the US. One of them is the Hispanic presence, right? What about the south to north story? What about the displacement of the Native American population, which one can think of as a kind of center periphery, where the center is not really in any localizable place, but spaces where people lived and were a center, an emotional center, and then were sent out to a kind of nothingness, desert lands and wastelands where it was difficult to grow crops. And so the book intertwines that foundational myth of the east to west narrative with all these other ways of understanding movement and displacement and relocations in this country, and in doing so, it also brings in a kind of other tradition in storytelling, which is not only the American Anglo tradition of the road novel, but also the Latin American tradition, where the trip or the voyage has a lot to do with kind of descending into consciousness, descending into the underworld, if you want to put it in those terms. So the novel has this kind of horizontal, vertical voyages or journeys, but also at the same time is a plunge into the subconscious of the US. and of the people involved in the story, which are 2 kids, a mother and a father. And I'm going to read for 1 minute unless my time is up. I can read for... So I'm just going to read you one page that is a page about reading and about the reason why I love to read. Although this is what my character says and not me. I stay up on the porch outside the cottage, reading Susan Sontag's journals. My arms and legs, a feast for the mosquitoes. Above my head, beetles smack their stubborn exoskeletons against a single light bulb. White moths spiral up around its halo, then plummet down. A small spider spins a trap in the intersection of a beam and a column. And in the distance, a redeeming constellation of fireflies, intermittent, landscapes the dark immensity beyond the rectangle of this porch. I don't keep a journal. My journals are the things I underline in books. I would never lend a book to anyone after having read it. I underline too much, sometimes entire pages, sometimes with double underline. My husband and I once read this copy of Sontag's journals together. We had just met. Both of us underlined entire passages of it, enthusiastically, almost feverishly. We read out loud, taking turns, opening the pages as if consulting an oracle, legs naked and intertwined on a twin bed. I suppose that words, timely and arranged in the right order, produce an afterglow. When you read words like that in a book, beautiful words, a powerful but fleeting emotion ensues. And you also know that soon it'll all be gone, the concept you just grasped and the emotion it produced. Then comes the need to possess that strange, ephemeral afterglow and to hold on to that emotion. So you read, underline, and perhaps even memorize and transcribe the words somewhere in a notebook, on a napkin, on your hand. In our copy of Sontag's journals, underlined once, twice, sometimes boxed in and marked at the margins. In a time hollowed out by decorum, one must school oneself in spontaneity. 1831, Hegel died. We sit in this rat hole on our asses growing eminent and middle-aged. In marriage, I have suffered a certain loss of personality. At first, the loss was pleasant, easy. The sky, as seen in the city, is negative, where the buildings are not. The parting was vague because the separation still seemed unreal. This last line I underlined in pencil and circled in black ink, and also flagged in the margin with an exclamation mark. Was it me or him who underlined it? I don't remember. I do remember, though, that when I read Sontag for the first time, just like the first time I read Hannah Arendt, Emily Dickinson, and Pascal, I kept having those sudden, subtle, and possibly microchemical raptures, little lights flickering deep inside my brain tissue, that some people experience when they finally find words for a very simple and yet till then utterly unspeakable feeling. When someone else's words enter your consciousness like that, they become small conceptual landmarks, light marks. They're not necessarily illuminating. A match struck a light in a dark hallway, the lit tip of a cigarette smoked in bed at midnight, embers in a dying chimney. None of these things has enough light of its own to reveal anything. Neither do anyone's words. But sometimes a little light can make you aware of the dark, unknown space that surrounds it, of the enormous ignorance that envelopes everything we think we know. And that recognition and coming to terms with darkness is more valuable than all the factual knowledge we may ever accumulate. Thank you.